Looking for ways to keep the kids entertained while traveling? Netflix Games lets them jump into fun, creative adventures at no extra cost. Everything's unlocked with your Netflix membership. From Paw Patrol Academy and Lego Duplo World to Barbie color creations and World of Peppa Pig, there's something for every little explorer. And you don't need Wi-Fi. Kids can play anytime, anywhere. Visit netflixfamily.com/travel tips for all your kids' holiday entertainment.
REI Co-op presents a perfect outdoor moment with the perfect gift.
Woo!
Picture this. You're ripping with your favorite person. Bluebird skies, blower powder, and frankly, you're skiing like legends.
So sick. Another lap?
Thanks to REI's curation, from lid to sticks, you nailed the gift.
No way. How'd you know?
Does it get more perfect than that? Give without guessing. Shop in store or visit rei.com.
Watch the film, you're frustrated, there's missed assignments, poor effort, no discipline, and your first instinct is to blame the players. They didn't execute, they weren't focused, they just don't get it. But what if the problem isn't them? What if the problem is your system? Or worse, what if you don't have a system for improvement? What if there's no blueprint behind your expectations or the structure behind your feedback? There's not a mechanism to improve things. You just keep yelling about. Because here's the truth. You can't fix what you haven't taken the time to understand. And most of the problems we see on film didn't start on the field. Today, we're going to dig into something that the Japanese call Kaizen. When I was 18, I went to work for an automotive parts manufacturer on the east side of Cleveland named ComCorp Industries. And the founder thought everything out in deep detail about his company. Even the name ComCorp had deep meaning for him and the company. ComCorp is Latin for a group of people working together. On day one, they gave me a copy of a book called Kaizen by Masaki Imai. Actually, still have it right here. I didn't realize it then, but this book would plant the seed for a mindset that would later shape how I think about football, coaching, leadership, and life in general. In that company, every single employee had a copy of Imai's book. And continuous improvement wasn't just a buzzword, it was how we operated. Everyone from the floor worker to management was empowered to identify problems and suggest improvements. And when those improvements led to success, there was a profit-sharing program that made sure we felt that impact. Daily improvements. Fix what bugs you, share what you learn, and it was the culture there. It's Kaizen, and it very much is a process. Nick Saban popularized the phrase, the process. And today, everyone talks about building one. But there's one question. What is the process? As coaches, we reference it constantly, but few of us can define its components and structure or the tools. And what I like about what we're sharing today with Kaizen is it gives us a framework rooted in discipline, people, and execution to actually build our process. So before we get into the football applications of this, let's unpack Kaizen as defined by its founder, Masaki Imai. Kaizen means improvement. Moreover, it means continuing improvement in personal life, home life, social life, and working life. When applied to the workplace, Kaizen means continuing improvement involving everyone, managers and workers alike. And this isn't a buzzword, it's a worldview. So Kaizen is simple. It's small improvements made by everyone. It's not innovation or breakthrough improvement. It's small things, low cost, people driven, and continuous. So it's something different than, coming out of business school, how we thought about things back then in the US. And I'll get into that in a second. Kaizen assumes every process can be improved, and it empowers employees, or in our case, the coaches and players, to own the improvement. We can build discipline, standardization, and share that responsibility. So going back to East versus West, Western systems, again, especially back then, and this is me graduating from high school and then college. When I worked there full time, I worked there actually as I went back to school. I was still coaching as I came out of college, but was working at this factory in a management position. So back then, Western systems often relied on specialists or top-down innovation. But in Japan, the belief was that people who do the work know the work and therefore can improve the work. So Kaizen focuses on the process and the results follow. So think about this from a football perspective and think about your program. What daily systems do you have where your players and staff are empowered to improve their environment, no matter how small? For me, I could think back to Baldwin Wallace and especially the work that we did together. My receivers coach, Jamie Fleming, and I would keep our groups together for the most part when we would watch film and do a lot in practice, obviously. And the thing I liked best was how we really shifted from, in my first year, this group of, especially with our receivers, that was very self-centered and selfish, worrying about when they get the ball, et cetera, to a group that was focused on improving each other and the processes. And they had no problem coming to us and saying, "Hey, coach, what if we did it this way?" And really, it led to improvements in our procedures, our techniques, and even some of our scheme, because we didn't necessarily always include them, but it would lead to a thought process that helped them improve because, if they're bringing up a question, they're spotting a potential problem there, which then we would dig into. Next aspect, Kaizen by total quality control. And this chapter describes how in Japan, they embedded Kaizen into their quality control process. So the key difference is quality is everyone's job, not just a department, where, again, going back at that time, many U.S. companies had the idea of a quality control department, meaning that issues weren't identified with a product or a process. And again, I worked at an automotive manufacturing plant, and we had we did forward lighting components, which had some very tight parameters for how these parts were manufactured and what they needed to be in the final output. And so total control really made everybody part of that process, not just the inspectors at the end when they're looking at the parts. We wanted to find any kind of issues throughout the process. So issues are spotted and corrected much faster because something small can really turn into something big. I mean, the last thing we would want in that factory is to have this production run of thousands of parts, which cost us a lot of money to do, and then wind up with, having to discard those or rework those again, which costs more money. So you think about it for us on the football side of things, something really small that maybe everybody's turning a blind eye to or thinking someone will catch it down the line. It's not my job to fix it. That can very easily turn into a loss. And that's not something we want at all in our programs. So the key element really is that on the manufacturing, on the business side of things, cross-functional teams are created to examine. On the football side of things, it's really everybody, right? You could make cross-functional teams, certainly. It's not just to our QC analyst at the end of things or somebody who serves in that role to find those. I'm spotting these things now. I'm going to speak up about it. I'm going to bring it to the attention. I'm going to come with a solution even. So managers and workers in Kaizen are trained in basic problem solving. And company-wide, that really becomes what you do. It's the norm and not the exception. So I wanted to give some simple examples and get you to think about how that might work in football. So let's think about something we all do, our film room. I think we've been a part of it as players, and sometimes we're a part of it as coaches, but how many of us show up the day after a game ready to create or critique every error made, and how much of it turns into an ass-ripping session under the guise of accountability? The question is, do we ask why, or are we just applying blame? We didn't see it executed the way we wanted, so it's that particular player's fault 100%. And it may be partially him to blame, but we want to get deeper into that. So Kaizen says, ask better questions, involve everyone, and improve the system. And let's dig further into that. There's tools that go along with this. And I want to highlight some of those, which are covered in another chapter. In here, the author in my lays out some practical tools of Kaizen, and these aren't theory. They're actionable, they're teachable, and they're coachable. They're tools that we did use back at Comcorp Industries when I worked there, and they certainly apply to football. And the 5 why analysis, I think, is probably one of the easiest ones to implement and get to the root cause of things. So the whole idea is you keep asking why until the root cause is clear. And the rule is ask why 5 times. Okay, and I'll give you an example of these tools in a minute. The next is called a fishbone diagram. And let me pull up a picture of what that looks like in the book so you could see it. I mean, it's pretty complex, and it's designed for obviously a manufacturing company, but it looks like, a fishbone skeleton. So there's the head of that where there is the problem, and then there's all these things along the way that help you troubleshoot the issue. And I'll give you an example of that. And then there's what Pareto analysis, or the 80-20 rule. You've probably heard of that before. So you identify the few causes that result in the majority of the problems. So I said I'd give some of those specifics, and these are just very basic, but I want to illustrate these. And so let's take a look at the 5 why analysis. And again, the 5 why analysis, you ask why repeatedly, usually 5 times until you identify the root cause, not just the symptoms. So if we think about missed assignment on a gap scheme, okay, and the offensive guard is consistently missing his kick-out block. So we ask why, and we take a look at it, and we see on film, he steps too flat and gets beat inside. Why? Well, he's not taking the correct angle. Why? We get to it, we talk to him, and he thinks his aiming point is the near number and not the play side shoulder, right? So now he's at the wrong aiming point, which is causing the wrong angle. Okay, well, why is that? We dig into it, and we go back to our install, and we didn't have maybe that detailed, or we work our drill, and we haven't made that an emphasis. He doesn't have that understanding. Now it starts to shift. How much starts to go on the process of what we did in the install? And again, I would think a lot of us do it, but I'm trying to illustrate the example. So again, why? Well, the install didn't emphasize aiming point adjustments versus a certain technique. Okay, so the outcome is the root cause isn't the player's effort. It's a breakdown in install and teaching details. So now, as a coach, you go back and you adjust your practice plans. You create different coaching cues or points of emphasis in your drill progression. And again, this is a very oversimplified version of it, but it also makes the point that a lot of the times we leave it on the player, and I think we need to dig deeper as coaches. Was there something along the way? It reminded me, we just put out a clip of podcast we did with Brian Hartline, where he talked about make sure your A players get A's, and the coach being deeply involved in everything the player does and making sure that you're setting up the player for success. And to me, that resonates a lot with this 5 whys and getting to it, and making sure that, in the process or in the failure of something that happened, on the field that you see on film, that you're able to make the corrections and understand where you can do better as a coach. And again, everybody owns that process. Okay, a fishbone diagram, which I showed you the picture of, is a tool to map out all the possible causes across major categories. So again, simple things here, and you have off the main head is the problem. You have this spine, and then off the spine are these different aspects of things that affect it. So it could be people, process, equipment, environment, things like that. So the example is there's a down in 2-minute offense. And so that's the head of the fish. The offense stalled during a 2-minute drill. And we really want to get to, well, why did that happen? And so we have on this branch, we label personnel. We think about it. We put miscommunication between the quarterback and receiver on signals. We put on their play calling. Maybe the offensive coordinator didn't get his plays in quickly enough. Practice design. We look at it in our practice design. We really didn't practice 2-minute with a live clock. It could have been that, hey, we're always out on this practice field. There's no clock. We actually didn't simulate that the way it works in the game. Environment. When we get to game day, maybe the crowd noise in the stadium impacted communication. Equipment, it could be maybe in this particular day when it failed, there was a malfunction on the headsets for the play caller. Again, oversimplification, maybe not all things that would happen, but the idea is you look at the main problem and all the things that can affect it to find what are the root causes of this or what things affect this that we can improve. And the outcome being that the tool helps you attack systemic issues instead of blaming individuals. You can now design that 2-minute live period during the week. You can improve your communication on the sidelines and getting plays in, understanding what you want to do ahead of time, by game planning, etc. Okay, the next one was the Pareto analysis or the 80-20 rule. And the idea is that you can identify a small number of causes, usually the 20%, that are responsible for the majority of the problems. So 80% of the problems, 20% of the causes are responsible for 80% of the problems is the idea. So tackling issues in game film, all right, maybe we see some problems with the tackle. We missed 20 tackles in the game. And so we take a look at that. And in this example, we find that 16 come from poor leverage versus perimeter runs. And then we found that 4 of these were from a DB with poor technique. So conclusion is that 80% of those problems come from 2 root causes: perimeter pursuit angles in space and one particular player's execution. So now we can put together a plan to attack that. We're going to emphasize open field tackling drills. We're going to, monitor those on film in practice and show them where they're right, where they're wrong, where they need to adjust. And then maybe we take that player who's having problems and we assign him to work one-on-one with a coach during different indie periods. The whole idea is that the tools, and we gave you 3, shift the mindset from blame to more of a system diagnosis, right? We're not here to point fingers. Yes, we need accountability, but we're really looking at diagnosing the system and reinforcing Kaizen's idea that the process should be improved before people are punished. So Kaizen will give you a practice which focuses on standardization, right? You're going to have a certain way of doing things. Discipline, teamwork, morale. It definitely will affect morale when your players feel that shift from we're going to get our asses ripped to we're going to solve some problems here. And then circles of continuous improvement. We call them QC circles every single morning at that plant, that way we started the day. And little things were shared from the previous day, whatever it might have been. Could have been a discovery in the setup process. Could have been something in how the workers at the machines, set their machines up in a way that caused an error, and that error can be avoided in the future. So the whole idea, though, we have incredible technology today in our fingertips, and certainly we want to get an edge with that technology, those analytics, all those tools that really are coming to the forefront of the game. But a lot of this goes back to one of my favorite quotes from Woody Hayes: you win with people, right? People are not going to be replaced by the technology. This is, especially in football, a people game, but I think it applies everywhere. This is about people, and continuous improvement starts with them. So to think about problem solving, again, this is going to be a 7-step approach through Kaizen. You want to identify the problem, analyze the problem. You're going to have those potential solutions, right? You want to generate some ideas of how do we fix this. Evaluate and select a solution, implement it, and then analyze the results. It really becomes a feedback loop, right? When you get that analysis, you're going to go back to, those potential solutions. Did it work or didn't it? And once you have that successful solution, then you standardize it, right? It becomes part of the process. So each step involves people doing the work and, really emphasizes documentation, discipline, and visual management. And, if you looked at that particular company, while we had all this technology that would keep track of our production, it was still about visual placement of some of those things. We'll talk about that in another episode. But, when you think about it, this loop, this continuous improvement is something we can create for our process that really is going to be ingrained in our culture and gets to the heart of what Coach Saban talks about all the time. So a couple things to think about as we wrap up and reflect on. What are 5 whys you need to ask in your program this week? What's one process, not a result, that you can improve by 1%? And the things to reflect on. And what we're going to do next, in our next episode, I'll have a coach on who's actually running their program on Kaizen principles at the FCS level, talking about daily discipline, visual management, player-led improvement, and systems of feedback. And you're going to hear what that looks like specifically for them in action. Be sure to follow all we're doing at coachingcoordinator.com. One thing we put together, and you're going to see with every single episode now in the show notes on coachingcoordinator.com. We'll put a link in the description to our Coaching Coordinator AI, which allows you to dig into exactly what we had from that episode. We stay within that knowledge base, so it's very specific to it. But if there's things here that you liked and you want to learn how to apply or dig deeper into how these might affect you, we've set it up in a way that it's going to map you as a user, ask you a few questions, ask you what you're looking for, and then give you, based on the transcript of the episode, some ideas for improvement. I've had coaches who've been using this really rave about what they've been able to do with this, and that's our goal, is to turn here and what we've been doing on the podcast, over 2,000 episodes now, into something that is applicable for you. I know I listen time to podcasts when I'm not in a place to take notes, so this is a place to go back, dig deeper into the learning, see how it applies to you, and we'd love to hear how you're using it so we can continue to improve that. Be sure you reach out to DM me on X at Coach K. Grabowski. You can email me, Keith@Coach. And we're excited to continue to bring you great ideas from coaches on the Coaching Coordinator Network.